place at the Strait of Hormuz and hopes growing for a potential second round of talks. The president tells Fox News the war may soon be over.
I had to divert because if I didn't do that, right now you would have Iran with a nuclear weapon. And if they had a nuclear weapon, you would be calling everybody over there, sir. And you don't want to do that.
Well, you keep saying was. Is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly.
With me now, lead global security analyst for the Washington Post, Josh Rogin, and vice president and senior director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcraft Center for Strategy and Security, Matthew Koenig. Glad to have both of you here. Josh, is the war close to being over? The president seems to think so.
Make no mistake, a blockade is an act of war. We are still at war, and there's no sign of that war ending anytime soon. Now, of course, President Trump would like the war to be over soon. He's clearly signaling he wants the war to be over soon. But the Iranians have a different strategy. Their strategy is to stretch this out as long as possible. Their strategy is to inflict as much pain on the U.S. and world economy as possible. And that's why Trump's strategy of blockading their blockade really doesn't make any sense when you think about it. They're going to blockade the strait, so we're going to blockade the strait to counter their blockade of the strait. And it's a recipe for continued stalemate. And so I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Trump is going to signal he wants to get out, and that's going to tell the Iranians that all they have to do is keep this going longer and longer.
He has said that he believes they want a deal very badly. I mean, the U.S. and Iran are trying to get back to the negotiating table, we're told. The vice president expected to lead a second round, possibly, of talks, Matthew, and Witkoff, Kushner, they're going to join as well. A New York Times op-ed put it this way. For Kushner and Witkoff, CEO diplomacy is no longer working. What should the U.S. do differently?
Well, I think there are two different tracks of diplomacy happening. So one is on the nuclear deal, and I think there actually Kushner and Witkoff were right to insist on zero enrichment and to walk away from Iran's demands that they retain enrichment, because once they can enrich fuel for a reactor, they can enrich fuel for a nuclear weapon. So I think they did that right. Where I think there's room for negotiation is on the Strait, and I could imagine a narrower deal where essentially the ceasefire continues, and the United States agrees not to resume large-scale bombing of Iran in exchange for the Iranians not holding the Strait hostage. Now, I don't think that's a likely outcome, but I could at least see that as a possibility, whereas a bigger deal on the nuclear program, I think, is just not in the cards.
And yet Iran is saying, the U.S. is saying it cannot have anything. He talks about pulling up stakes that could take 20 years to rebuild. Iran insists that it is within its legal ability and right to enrich uranium. Who will cede ground on this issue?
Right. It's almost as if the Trump team doesn't care about the 20-year history of us negotiating with Iran over this very issue. Because if they had consulted any of the experts or any of the people in the State Department who have worked on this whole time, they would know that, of course, Iran is going to insist on the principle of uranium enrichment. And, of course, the United States is going to have to come up with a fix that takes away the threat of that enrichment while giving them that face-saving measure. That's the basic premise that the Iran deal was rooted in and that Trump got rid of, and it's the only way to get to an agreement now. So eventually we're going to have to get there. How long is it going to take for Witkoff and Kushner to realize that and then come up with that? Well, that's the problem, because until they realize the obvious fact that we're going to have to come to some sort of compromise where we eliminate the threat of Iran's nuclear enrichment while allowing them to save face by keeping the principle of enrichment, we're going to be at war with Iran, and that could be a very long time, quite unfortunately, for the American soldiers who are in harm's way, and the Iranian people, by the way.
Good point. I want to turn back to the U.S. blockade. The U.S. military, Matthew, says that 6 ships have turned around and returned Iranian ports. You've got CENTCOM saying U.S. forces have completely halted economic trade going into and out of Iran by sea. You've got tracking data showing multiple Iran-linked ships passing through the strait. So is this blockade even working?
Well, I'm somewhat more optimistic, I think, than Josh. The Iranians are trying to hold the Strait hostage with this threat to attack ships. And the United States came back and countered the blockade by putting in place our own blockade, saying essentially that we'll allow other ships to pass, but not Iranian ships. And the Iranians are very dependent on trade through the Strait. 50 to 70% of U.S. or Iranian government revenue is dependent on energy exports. So if the United States can drive that down to zero over the coming weeks, that really creates dilemmas for the regime in Tehran. Do they stop subsidies to their people? Does that lead to more uprisings? Are they able to pay their security services? Do they decide to stand aside if there are other uprisings? So I do think the United States is in the driver's seat now, and this is a different position than we were in just a few days ago, where the Iranians seem to hold all the cards.
Well, we'll see. Many questions still lingering. Josh, Matthew, thank you both.